It all started when Dean thought he was invincible. He wasn't a mastermind. Hell, he wasn't even the smartest guy in the room. But he had something no one else had. A dream. A dream of a life filled with luxury, high-end cars, million-dollar watches, and penthouses that made people like him feel untouchable. And that dream, it led him to the perfect crime. Dean had spent most of his life skating by, just enough to survive, never really fitting in with the elite or the powerful. He was the guy you'd see hustling outside a convenience store, running side deals with shady characters, making just enough to scrape by. Fake IDs, skimming a little cash here and there, living life in the gray zone. Nothing too dangerous, just enough to feel like he was making moves. The thrill was the thing, but deep down, Dean knew he wasn't living up to his potential. And then one night it happened. Dean was sitting in his cramped apartment, sipping on some cheap whiskey, scrolling through his phone. It was a bad habit, but it kept his mind off the fact that he was stuck in a dead-end life. He'd been following a couple of underground auction houses, places where people like him, people who'd never be allowed inside the real world of the rich, could score some high-end items, or maybe even some stolen art. A quick flip, nothing major. But tonight something caught his eye. It was a single innocent click on an ad for rare collectibles that had been marked as exclusive access. Dean's gut told him this was different, but his ambition was already kicking in, pushing him to explore deeper. He clicked on it, and suddenly, the world as he knew it opened up. The page loaded with images of priceless jewels, expensive rare art, and an interface that was untraceable. It looked like a black market treasure chest, hidden right under the noses of the ultra-wealthy. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill scam. This was the real deal. This auction was dealing in stolen masterpieces, jewels, and global assets, things that could change his life forever. It was the perfect opportunity. No one would ever know who'd taken it. No fingerprints, no paper trail, nothing. Dean could just grab these treasures and vanish. It was like a dream come true. He leaned back, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Dean, you've just hit the jackpot," he muttered to himself, eyes glued to the screen. He could almost feel the luxury already, the expensive suits, the fancy cars. But it was more than that. He could feel the power too. No one would be able to touch him, not when he had this kind of leverage. Dean knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. The first call was to Mitch. Mitch wasn't a guy you'd bring home to meet your mom, but he was damn good with computers. Mitch could hack through anything, from security systems to online banking. He'd bailed Dean out more times than Dean could count. "Yo, Mitch, you busy?" Dean's voice was casual, but there was something more in his tone. Mitch could hear it, the excitement. The kind of excitement that only came when you were about to change your life forever. "What's up, Dean?" Mitch replied, a little distracted. "You got a gig? Are you just bored out of your mind?" "I found something," Dean said, his voice low. "Something big. Something that could make us both a lot of money. You in?" There was silence for a moment. Mitch knew Dean well enough to know when it was worth paying attention. "All right, I'm listening." Dean explained the auction, the untraceable system, and the millions of dollars worth of goods just waiting to be stolen. Mitch didn't need to be convinced. The thrill was too much to resist. Next was Sammy, the con artist. Sammy was smooth, so smooth in fact, that he could talk his way out of any situation. He had a reputation for getting past locked doors, for making people believe he was someone he wasn't. Dean knew Sammy could pose as an insider, a fake contact within the auction house to make sure everything went smoothly. "Sammy, you busy?" Dean asked, his voice almost playful. "Depends, man," Sammy said, always sounding like he was in the middle of a deal. "What you got?" "I need you to help me pull off the heist of the century," Dean said, giving him just enough to hook him. "You know I'm in," Sammy replied with a smirk. "But if we're doing this, we do it right. No mistakes." Dean laughed. "No mistakes. We're going to clean up big time." Finally, there was Kate, the getaway driver. She'd been around, seen it all, done it all. Bank heists, carjackings, the works. She was always calm, always collected, and always fast when it counted. Dean knew she was the only one who could pull off the escape once they had the goods. "Kate," Dean said when he called her, "I need you for something big. You in?" "Tell me it's a sure thing," Kate replied, her voice cool and level. But Dean could hear the curiosity under the calm tone. "Sure thing," he said, the smile creeping back onto his face. "We'll be out before anyone even knows we're there." And just like that, Dean had his crew. As the days passed, the tension began to build. Dean knew the risk, but the rewards were too sweet to ignore. Mitch had cracked the system, Sammy had put on his best act, and Kate had lined up the perfect getaway route. Everything was falling into place. Dean started to feel invincible. The day of the heist arrived. It was like nothing he'd ever experienced. The crew was in position. Dean could already see the riches, feel the power slipping through his fingers, the walls of his small-time world crumbling to dust. They were about to take it all. But as Dean sat in the back of the car, watching Sammy work his charm on the inside man, something gnawed at him. He wasn't just doing this for the money anymore. He wanted more. The rush, the adrenaline, the control. It was intoxicating. He began thinking bigger. What if they didn't just steal a few items? What if they took everything? Dean's mind spun, and for the first time, he could see the future stretched out in front of him. His life elevated. He grinned to himself. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. But then, just as Sammy sent him a text saying everything was set, he felt the familiar jolt of unease. Something was off. The text wasn't from Sammy. It was from an unknown number. The message was simple. "We know everything. You're not as clever as you think." Dean's heart stopped for a second. The blood drained from his face. His hands gripped the steering wheel harder, knuckles turning white. His whole world started to feel like it was unraveling. The heist wasn't just about getting rich anymore. He was being played. And the worst part? The authorities weren't coming for him through his mistakes. No, they were coming because they knew his ambition. They knew he would push further than anyone else, and they let him do it. They'd set him up, using his greed against him, and now they were closing in. Dean had crossed the line, and now the consequences were coming for him. Fast. Dean had spent his entire life in the shadows, skimming by just beneath the surface of society, always looking up at the rich, the powerful, the untouchable. But deep inside, something had always burned. A hunger. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the lifestyle, though that was definitely a bonus. It was the power that came with it, the control. He didn't just want to steal. He wanted to make the whole world bow to him. And the auction house? It was the perfect target. The plan had been simple, almost too easy. Mitch was the tech genius who'd gotten them through the first stage, hacking into the auction house's back end and covering their tracks like a ghost in the system. Sammy, the smooth talker, would handle the human side of things, posing as an insider with fake credentials, someone who could move through the auction house without raising suspicion. And then there was Kate, the driver. She was cold and precise, the best getaway driver Dean had ever met. She could get in and out of any place without leaving a trace, and that was exactly what Dean needed. But in the back of his mind, as the plan came together, something shifted. The more he thought about it, the more he realized. This wasn't just about getting rich. It was about domination. Dean started making side deals, little ones at first, promises to the auction house's competitors, using the crew's hard work as leverage. He didn't tell anyone about it. Hell, they didn't need to know. They were just pawns in his game. Mitch, Sammy, and Kate, they were dispensable. He knew they'd be useful for the heist, but in the end, it was his ambition that would carry him to the top. They didn't get it. They were too focused on the short term, the easy payout. But Dean was playing the long game. He wasn't just going to steal from the rich. He was going to take their throne. As the days drew closer to the heist, the crew started to get restless. Mitch kept asking questions about the plan's finer details. Sammy couldn't stop talking about the potential payout. And Kate was starting to look at him sideways, like she could see through his act. Dean could feel the weight of their doubts, and the more they pressed, the more he pulled away. They didn't need to know what was really going on. He could already feel it, the shift in power, the way he was moving through life now. It was like he was floating, like nothing and no one could touch him. No one would question him. No one could stop him from taking what was rightfully his. But even as he isolated himself from his crew, the tension started to build. A nagging voice in the back of his head whispered, "What if it all falls apart? What if they figure you out?" But Dean pushed it away. He had everything under control. The night before the heist, as Dean sat alone in his apartment, He couldn't help but stare at the stacks of blueprints and documents sprawled out in front of him. The whole plan was laid bare, each detail painstakingly accounted for. The auction house's security was impenetrable, the jewels priceless, the art untouchable. But Dean wasn't afraid. He was ready. He reached for his phone and checked his messages. Nothing new. Then he noticed it. An email from the competitors he'd been talking to. The deal had gone through, the leverage had been secured. They were going to move in on the auction once the heist was complete. Dean's grin spread wide as he read through the fine print, his fingers itching with excitement. But then something caught his eye. A line he hadn't seen before, a clause buried at the bottom of the email. "We know about your team." Dean's stomach dropped. He read it again, his heart racing. "We know about your team?" He felt the floor tilt beneath him, his vision narrowing as panic gripped him. He had trusted these people. Mitch, Sammy, Kate. But were they working with someone else? Were they playing him too? He shot off a reply, his fingers flying over the keyboard, trying to maintain control. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. He couldn't afford any mistakes. "You're still in. Just remember who made this happen." Dean stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His mind raced as he paced the room, trying to piece everything together. His plan was flawless. So why did he feel like the walls were closing in? What if they were setting him up? What if his crew had caught wind of his side deals? What if they were going to double-cross him? The cold sweat on his brow was enough to send him into a spiral. He pulled his phone out again, dialing Sammy's number. It rang. "Yeah?" Sammy's voice was smooth, but Dean could hear the edge of impatience creeping in. "Where are you?" Dean demanded, his tone sharp. "Relax, man. I'm on it. You'll get the goods. Everything's under control." Sammy's confidence was almost too much, like he was trying to placate Dean, but Dean wasn't buying it. Not anymore. "I don't know. Something feels off," Dean admitted, his voice low, unsure if he should even be saying it aloud. "I don't like it, Sammy." "What are you talking about?" "The plan's solid. Don't let fear mess this up." Dean took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Yeah, you're right. We just need to stick to the plan." But as he hung up, the weight of his own words felt hollow. The plan was never going to be enough anymore. He had pushed too far. There was no going back. The next day, the heist began. Dean's crew moved with precision. Mitch had hacked into the auction's back end, breaking down their security systems with ease. Sammy worked his charm, slipping past the staff and walking out with the items they needed. Kate was already behind the wheel, engine revved, waiting for the crew to return. But Dean wasn't there with them. He had decided to go ahead with his backup plan, his backup deal. As they made their way out of the auction house with the jewels and art, Dean was already making his way to the rival competitor's headquarters. He wasn't just going to take what was rightfully his. He was going to double-cross the double-crossers. This was his moment. His ambition was bigger than any crew, any heist, any plan. And that was his downfall. As Mitch sent him a quick text saying, "We're in position, ready for extraction," Dean saw the flash of a notification. His phone buzzed once more, but this time it was different. The message read, "We know about the deal you made with the competition." Dean's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit him harder than any punch. His greed had blinded him. He had no idea who he was really playing against. And now it was too late. Dean's downfall wasn't about making mistakes. It was about thinking he could outsmart everyone, thinking his crew was just a stepping stone. But he hadn't seen it coming. He hadn't realized the only thing standing between him and everything he'd ever dreamed of was his own ambition. And now the authorities were closing in on him, not through his mistakes, but through his ambition. The end was near. The night was dark. Not a single car on the road. The silence in the air was thick, almost suffocating. The kind of silence that made you feel like something was about to happen. Something big, something life-changing. For Dean, it was the silence of success. Tonight was the night that would change everything. Mitch had done his part. The auction house's security was as tight as a vault, but Mitch had hacked through it like it was nothing. Sammy was playing his part. Smooth and easy, slipping into the auction house like he belonged there. Flashing fake credentials, whispering sweet lies to anyone who would listen. And Kate? Kate was already in position, the getaway car parked just out of sight, engine purring softly, waiting to move the second Dean gave the word. Everything was falling into place. Dean felt the rush, like a drug. He had planned this down to the last detail. This was the moment that he had been working toward his whole life, the moment when everything would finally be his. He wasn't just after the jewels, the art, the money. No, it was more than that. He was after power. The kind of power that came from stealing from the untouchables. The kind of power that would make him a king. Dean's footsteps echoed in the grand hallway of the auction house as he moved toward the private rooms. The walls were lined with priceless pieces, ancient statues, rare paintings, treasures that even the richest people in the world would sell their souls for. He could feel it, the power coursing through him as he walked deeper into the vaults. He'd come so far, done so much, and now he was about to take it all. But as Dean entered the final room, the one that held the most valuable items, the ones that would set him up for life, he felt something shift. Something in him snapped. It wasn't just the jewels or the art. It was the feeling of control, of having everything in his hands. Dean glanced at the items, statues, rare paintings, jewels, gold and silver, that would be enough to retire on, enough to make him untouchable. But something inside him twisted, something dark and greedy. He wasn't just going to take what was agreed upon. He was going to take it all. He moved quickly, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the last item, the most valuable one, a diamond necklace so rare it was practically priceless. But it wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. He reached for another painting, a piece worth millions, and stuffed it into the bag he had with him. More. Always more. Dean's pulse raced as he grabbed a few more items. No one would miss them. No one would even know they were gone. It was the perfect heist. No trace, no evidence. Just him, the crew, and a vault full of stolen treasures. He didn't feel guilty. He didn't feel scared. He felt powerful. Dean stepped back, the bag heavy with more than he should have taken. He was on the way to the exit, a smile creeping across his face as he made his way through the quiet corridors. He could already hear the hum of Kate's car idling outside, ready to take him away to the life he had always dreamed of. And then as he passed one of the rooms, he saw something. Something that made his blood run cold. A note slipped under the door. It was simple, but it hit him like a punch to the gut. "We know everything. You're not as clever as you think." Dean froze. The note was like a slap across his face, a sharp sting that sent his heart racing. For a second, he didn't know what to do. His mind was reeling, trying to make sense of it. Who knew? How could they know? He had been careful, hadn't he? He'd covered his tracks. No one had seen him. No one had been able to trace him back to this. It couldn't be the cops. They were nowhere near. But then again, who else could it be? His fingers went numb as he slowly reached for the door handle. The anxiety began to crawl up his spine. He wanted to look, to see who was there. But at the same time, he was terrified. What if someone was waiting for him? What if this was all a setup? His mind raced, the walls of the auction house seeming to close in around him. His breath was shallow, his pulse pounding in his ears. He stepped toward the door, trying to calm his shaking hands. Who else could it be? But the truth hit him like a freight train. He didn't know, and that was what scared him the most. He opened the door slowly, the creak of the hinges almost deafening in the silence. No one was there. The hallway was empty. His eyes darted around, scanning the room for any sign of movement. Nothing. No one's here. But then why the note? Dean grabbed the note and stuffed it into his jacket, trying to push the fear down. He had no time to think about it. He had to get out. But as he turned to leave, something else hit him. The sound of footsteps. Quick, soft, steady footsteps behind him. Dean spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. He barely had time to react when he saw a shadow in the hallway. A figure. A person. "You think you're clever, don't you?" The voice was smooth, almost mocking. Dean's breath hitched in his chest. How had they gotten so close without him noticing? He couldn't move. His feet felt frozen to the floor. The person stepped out of the shadows, revealing themselves to be an older man in a sharp suit. Too sharp for the kind of place Dean was in. It took Dean a second to realize who he was. The auction house's head security. The one person who had been watching the entire time. "You thought you could steal from us," the man said, his tone cold and calm. "But we've been watching you. All along." Dean's heart skipped a beat. What? What are you talking about?" The man smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent chills down Dean's spine. We knew you'd come for it. You're not the first one to think they could walk away with our treasures. But you, Dean, you're going to be the one who makes a mistake. The room seemed to grow smaller, the walls pressing in as panic set in. Dean turned to run, but the man was already moving toward him, blocking the way. You're not leaving here, Dean. Dean's hands were shaking. Sweat trickled down his neck. The adrenaline coursed through his body as his mind scrambled to find an escape. He couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not after everything he'd done to get this far. He tried to backpedal, but the security guard was faster. He stepped forward, grabbing Dean's wrist with surprising strength. You can't run from this. Dean's mind raced, his thoughts jumbled together in a desperate blur. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. The guard's grip tightened as Dean struggled to break free, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. You didn't just steal from us, the man said, his voice low and almost pitying. You thought you could destroy everything we've built. But that's where you're wrong. Dean's knees buckled, and he slumped to the floor in defeat. The realization hit him with full force. He had been played all along. The ambition that had driven him, the greed that had consumed him, had made him a target. And now there was no way out. Justice had found him. Dean's blood ran cold. The note hit him like a punch to the gut. It was as though the walls of the auction house had come alive, whispering his deepest fears. They knew. But how? How had they found out? Dean's heart was pounding in his chest, and his breath came in shallow gasps. For a second, everything stopped. His mind locked in a freeze frame, trying to process the chaos that was unfolding. The note had slipped under the door like some cruel message from fate. He couldn't shake the words that echoed in his head. You're not as clever as you think. It was the moment he had feared, but never truly believed would come. His entire plan was unraveling. How had the authorities gotten so close without him noticing? Had Mitch slipped up? Sammy? Kate? They had been working like clockwork, moving with precision, no signs of mistakes or hesitation. So how could they know? How could they be on to him? But then it hit him. The answer was right in front of him all along. In the chaos that followed, it felt like the world was crumbling around him. Dean's mind raced, spiraling downward as his stomach twisted with dread. The crew had no idea what was happening. Mitch had been the first to panic, his frantic voice cutting through the tense silence of the room. Mitch, what's happening? Dean barked into his phone, gripping it tightly as his pulse thrummed in his ears. Man, the system's been traced. The entire system. The backup's gone. They know. The feds. They know, man. Mitch's voice cracked, full of fear. I thought I covered it. I thought everything was clean, but Dean's grip tightened on the phone. Feds. Calm down, Mitch, Dean shouted, trying to stay in control. But inside, panic was creeping in. He never should have taken so much. He never should have done this. He should have stuck to the plan. Next, Sammy's voice came through, shaky and panicked, clearly losing his cool. This isn't just about the auction anymore, Dean, Sammy said. I'm hearing sirens. They've got the whole place locked down. I've got a bad feeling about this. I'm out. I'm out, man. Dean's breath hitched. His head was spinning. Sammy's gone? Sammy was supposed to be the smooth one, the guy who always had a way out of every situation. Dean's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. He thought he was untouchable. They've been tracking us from the start, from the beginning. How could he have been so blind? Kate, he barked, his voice trembling with fear. Kate, where are you? I'm pulling away, Kate replied, her voice tense. But I can't shake the feeling that we're being followed. I'm on the move. But this is messed up, Dean. I don't feel good about this. Dean's hands shook as he snapped the phone shut, his thoughts a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. He had been so sure, so confident that he was playing them all. He had thought he was the mastermind, that he was ahead of everyone. But now, as panic began to set in, he realized he was the one who had been played. He couldn't hold it together. The walls felt like they were closing in. His thoughts were racing too fast for him to keep up, and all he could hear was the deafening sound of his own breath, quick and shallow. Every instinct told him to run, to escape. But where could he go? They had him trapped. They knew everything. The authorities had been tracking his every move, not through his mistakes, but through his ambition. The note was the bait, and he had taken it hook, line, and sinker. Dean thought back to the side deals he'd made, the extra promises he'd given to the auction house's competitors. He had been so wrapped up in his own ambition, in the power he thought he could wield, that he hadn't even noticed they were already 2 steps ahead of him. The auction house had been playing the long game too. They had let him believe he was untouchable, let him think he was the one pulling the strings, when in reality, they had been the ones controlling the board the entire time. Dean stumbled out of the room, panic clawing at his insides. He didn't know what to do next. He couldn't stop thinking about the money, the riches, the life he was supposed to have, but all he felt now was terror. He had it all within his grasp, and he had let his greed destroy it. He tried to calm himself, but the adrenaline was too much. The walls of the auction house seemed to close in, each step forward feeling like it was pulling him deeper into a trap. Dean reached the back exit, the one he had planned to use as a quick getaway. But just as he was about to push the door open, a voice echoed down the corridor. "It's over, Dean." Dean's heart stopped. The voice wasn't Kate's. It wasn't Sammy's. It was a voice he'd never heard before, but it was cold and menacing. He turned slowly, dread filling his chest. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a suit, clean, sharp, and completely out of place in the dimly lit back alley of the auction house. "How did you—" Dean's voice faltered as the man stepped closer, his face unreadable. "I'm with the FBI," the man said, his voice calm, calculated. "We've been watching you for months, all your moves, all your little tricks. But we let you go ahead and make your move. Let you think you were the one in control." Dean's mind raced. "FBI? How could you let me get this far?" Dean whispered, his voice shaking. You knew everything." The agent's eyes narrowed. "You were never in control, Dean. You were always just a pawn in a much bigger game. You thought you could take down the system, but the system is smarter than you'll ever be." Dean felt a wave of realization crash over him, like a tsunami. His breath hitched as his legs wobbled beneath him. His pulse raced faster. It wasn't just the auction house. It wasn't just about getting rich. This was bigger. They had been watching him. They had let him think he was invincible, let him steal from the powerful, all while the trap was closing around him. Dean's eyes darted around, but he had nowhere to run. No exit, no backup plan, nothing. "How long?" Dean asked, voice trembling. "How long have you been watching?" "Longer than you can imagine," the agent said, stepping closer, the smirk never leaving his face. "We knew about the auction house, but we knew about you too, Dean. From the moment you walked in and made your first mistake, we knew you were the one we needed." Dean felt sick. The wall seemed to close in on him. His whole life had been leading to this moment, the moment when his ambition finally caught up with him. He thought he could play the game, but he had been played the entire time. It was over. Dean was done. There was no way out anymore. The agent pulled out a pair of handcuffs, clicking them open with a sound that seemed to echo through the empty corridor. Dean's world shrank to that sound. His breath, shallow and frantic, his thoughts scattered. He was no longer the man in control. He was the one being caught. The life he had dreamed of, luxury, power, control, was slipping through his fingers. But this wasn't just about the money. This wasn't just about the heist. It was about one thing, one lesson. Dean had been consumed by his ambition. He had played the game, but in the end, the game had played him. The phone call came on a Thursday morning, sharp and clear. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, like the person on the other side already knew the outcome. "Dean, it's over." At first, he didn't believe it. He thought it was some kind of trick, a bluff. But the words kept coming, relentless. The authorities had been closing in for days. Mitch, Sammy, and Kate had already been caught, one by one. Their names were plastered across the news. Dean hadn't seen it coming. How could they crack? Mitch had always been good with the tech. Sammy had a silver tongue. Kate, well, she'd been untouchable, the best getaway driver he'd ever known. Dean had thought he was smarter than everyone else. He was the one who came up with the plan, the one who had set everything in motion. They had all worked for him, done what he asked, trusted him, and in the end, it was that trust that would be their undoing. Dean wasn't one to show fear. It wasn't in him. Fear was for the weak, for the ones who didn't have the stomach to chase what they wanted. But as the days passed and the authorities picked apart every move he made, A different kind of weight settled on him. Dean was used to being the one who pulled the strings, who made the calls. He didn't need to think about the consequences, didn't need to question his actions. But now all of a sudden the pieces were falling into place, and none of them were in his favor. The realization hit him harder than any blow. It wasn't my smarts that made me untouchable. It was my ambition. Dean's phone rang again, this time the number unfamiliar. It was his lawyer, but Dean wasn't in the mood to talk. He hit ignore, tossing the phone onto the couch beside him. The penthouse, his dream home, the one he'd imagined himself living in for years, felt like a prison now. He had everything. He had the wealth, the luxury, the power. He had more than most people could ever dream of. But as he sat there, his head heavy with shame, he realized it wasn't enough. Dean had tried to outsmart them. He had thought he could run away, slip through their fingers, disappear with the money, the treasures, and leave the crew behind to take the fall. But it wasn't just his crew that had been betrayed. It was him. His ambition had driven him to the point where he couldn't see the bigger picture. And now he was left with nothing but the weight of his greed. His downfall didn't come from the authorities. It didn't come from Mitch, Sammy, or Kate, even though they were the ones he had betrayed. No, his downfall came from within. His own ambition, the desire for more, had turned his once loyal team into a liability. The more he took, the more he wanted, and it cost him everything. Dean leaned back in his chair, staring out the window, the city sprawling beneath him, the skyline stretching far into the distance. He could hear the sirens in the background, getting closer, closer. But he wasn't afraid. Not yet. His mind kept going back to the first time he'd walked into that underground auction house, the moment he had seen the potential, the opportunity. He could feel it all over again, the rush, the power, the knowledge that he could take it all. They don't know what I'm capable of, he thought. They don't know what I'm going to do next. But that was the lie he told himself. Because deep down, he knew he had crossed the line. He had become the thing he'd always hated, the greedy, power-hungry man who would do anything to win. He thought he could play the game without getting caught. But now, as he sat in his empty penthouse, the truth was undeniable. It wasn't some high-speed chase that led to his capture. It wasn't a dramatic showdown or a final escape attempt. No, it was quieter than that. Dean sat there in his chair, the weight of the last few years of his life pressing down on him. He had made it to the top, had gotten everything he wanted, but now it was all slipping away. The riches, the deals, the power, it was all gone. His phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't ignore it. He picked it up slowly, staring at the screen. It was a text from Mitch. They got Sammy. They got Kate. I tried to warn you, but you were too far gone. You never should have taken more. We were a team, Dean. You were our leader, but now? You're just another one they caught. Dean stared at the message, the words sinking in like a slow poison. Mitch had always been loyal, had always had his back. But in the end, it was Dean's ambition that tore everything apart. He had led them all down a path of destruction, and now they were paying the price. The knock on the door came a few moments later. It was soft, almost tentative, but Dean knew what it was. He didn't need to look through the peephole to know what awaited him on the other side. The authorities had finally caught up. His penthouse, the place he had worked so hard to create, now felt like a tomb. The door creaked open, and 2 officers stepped inside. There was no resistance. Dean didn't fight, didn't try to run. He was done. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Dean closed his eyes. He could almost hear the voices of Mitch, Sammy, and Kate echoing in his mind. He could almost hear them asking, "Why did you betray us, Dean? Why did you think you were above it all?" Dean was escorted out of the penthouse and into the police car waiting for him outside. The lights from the squad car flashed in the darkness, and for a brief moment, Dean could see the city around him in all its splendor. The same city he had once dreamed of conquering. But now as he sat in the back of that car, he felt nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. He had lost everything. The money, the power, the luxury. It was all gone. And for what? Dean realized as the car pulled away from his penthouse and into the night, that it wasn't the auction house, the authorities, or even his crew that had brought him down. It was his own ambition. His greed had eaten him alive, and now it had cost him everything he had ever wanted. In the end, Dean was left with nothing but the hollow ache of a man who had believed in his own invincibility, only to be crushed under the weight of his own desires. And there was no one left to blame but himself. Justice had found him, not through the mistakes he made, but through the ambition that had consumed him from the start. Dean had always thought he could escape the consequences. He had planned it all, the perfect heist, the perfect escape, the perfect life. But in the end, he couldn't escape the one thing that had been driving him all along, his own ego. He had always believed that he was smarter than everyone else, that he could outmaneuver anyone. But now, as he sat in his cold, sterile cell, the realization hit him harder than anything else ever could. It wasn't the authorities that had put him here, or even his crew's betrayal. It was his own arrogance, his obsession with power and luxury that had led him to this point. The first few months in prison had been a blur of confusion and anger. Dean had spent so much of his life on top, in control, never having to answer to anyone. But now he was nobody, just another face behind bars. The prison was everything Dean hadn't prepared for. The walls were higher than he ever imagined. The silence of his cell was deafening. He was left alone with his thoughts, trapped in a small room that smelled of cold cement and regret. The life he had dreamed of was now nothing but a distant memory, a cruel reminder of how far he had fallen. But the hardest part was the isolation. In the outside world, Dean had always had people to manipulate, to control, but now no one cared. No one was listening to him. The doors to his cell were locked, and he had nowhere to run, no one to deceive. The first time Dean saw Mitch after the trial, it was in the prison yard. Mitch had been a state's witness, turning on Dean to save himself. Dean could barely look at him. Mitch had been the one person he thought he could trust, and now Mitch was part of the very system that had put him behind bars. It stung worse than any betrayal. "Mitch," Dean said, his voice tight, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "You really thought you could play both sides?" Mitch just looked at him, cold, his face hard. He didn't even flinch. "You think I had a choice?" Mitch replied, his voice surprisingly calm, given the circumstances. "You left me no choice. You used me. You used all of us, Dean. You thought you could control everything, but look where it got you." Dean clenched his fists, the anger bubbling up inside him. He wanted to say something back, to make Mitch feel the pain he was feeling, but the words wouldn't come. Mitch had been right. Dean had used him, and now the power he had craved was gone. The days blurred together. Dean's reputation in prison was one of quiet contempt. He had made a name for himself as a mastermind, someone who had orchestrated one of the biggest heists in history. But here, in this world, it didn't matter. The guards didn't care about his brilliance, and the other inmates saw him for what he was now. Just another criminal, just another person stuck in a cage. In the prison yard, Dean kept to himself, his dreams of luxury fading with each passing day. He thought about his life before all this, the world he could have had, the people he could have trusted. But all of it seemed so distant now. It was like watching a movie from the outside, a life he could never go back to. And then there was Sammy. Sammy's name had been on everyone's lips since the trial. He had run, disappeared without a trace. For months, no one knew where he was, but rumors circulated. Some said he was living the high life in another country, under a new identity. Others said he was already dead, buried somewhere far away. Dean didn't know which was worse, the fact that Sammy had abandoned him, or the fact that Sammy had survived. Dean had never thought Sammy would run. Sammy had been the one who talked the most about loyalty, about the thrill of the game. But when the heat came down, Sammy was the first one to bail, and Dean was left to face the consequences alone. "Sammy's a coward," Dean muttered under his breath, staring out the small window in his cell. "A snake, a rat." But deep down, Dean knew the truth. Sammy wasn't the only one who had betrayed him. He had betrayed his crew, his friends, his family, all for the sake of his own ambition. And now they were all paying the price. Dean never saw Kate again after the heist fell apart. She had been the getaway driver, planning the escape routes, ensuring they got away clean. But when the job went wrong, Kate became a target. Dean's betrayal of her sealed her fate. She had been loyal, but he had used her just like everyone else. Now, rumors spread about her. Some said she was hiding, others that she was in prison. Either way, Dean's actions had ruined her life. One evening, Dean sat in his cell, overwhelmed by the weight of his downfall. A guard brought news. Dean, you've got a visitor. Confused, Dean walked to the visitation room. He expected it to be someone from his past, but when he entered, it wasn't Mitch, Sammy, or Kate. It was an investigator. You must be wondering why I'm here, the investigator began. You thought you were in control, but now you're alone. Your money, power, freedom, all gone. Your ambition destroyed you. The investigator stood up and left without another word, leaving Dean alone. The finality of it all hit him. His ambition had led him here, trapped, alone, and broken. His dreams of power had become a nightmare. Justice had been served, not through mistakes, but through his own unquenchable ambition.